Part 1. The Calm Before the Storm. July 1943. The Eastern Front had become a battlefield unlike anything the world had ever seen. Millions of soldiers stood ready. Tens of thousands of artillery pieces waited in silence. Above them, thousands of aircraft circled the skies. And hidden behind forests and endless fields, waited the largest concentration of tanks in human history. Within days, more than 6,000 tanks and self-propelled guns would collide in a battle so enormous that it would shake the foundations of World War II. One side believed it could reclaim the initiative. The other was determined to destroy that hope forever. The battlefield was a massive bulge in the Soviet lines near the city of Kursk. Here, Germany prepared one final offensive in the east. Its codename, Operation Citadel. This was not simply another battle. It was a gamble. Adolf Hitler believed that one decisive victory could restore German dominance after the disastrous defeat at Stalingrad. If the attack succeeded, Germany might regain the initiative. If it failed, the Red Army would seize control of the war forever. But while German commanders finalized their plans, the Soviets were already preparing. Soviet intelligence had learned about the coming offensive months in advance. Instead of attacking first, they made a bold decision. They would wait. Day after day, hundreds of thousands of civilians dug endless defensive lines. Thousands of anti-tank guns were carefully concealed. Millions of mines were buried beneath the earth. Entire villages became fortresses. Every road, every hill, every open field was transformed into a deadly trap. Marshal Georgy Zhukov believed patience would win the battle. Rather than meeting the Germans head-on, the Soviet Union would let them exhaust themselves against layer after layer of defenses. It was one of the most ambitious defensive plans ever created. Across the front, nearly 2 million Soviet soldiers waited in silence. They knew the attack was coming. They simply didn't know the exact hour. On the German side, confidence remained high. The Wehrmacht gathered its most powerful armored divisions. Brand new Panther tanks rolled toward the front. Massive Tiger tanks prepared for battle. Ferdinand tank destroyers, designed to destroy enemy armor from long distances, joined the offensive. German commanders believed superior technology would once again break Soviet resistance. Yet beneath that confidence lay uncertainty. Every week the offensive was delayed. Every delay gave the Soviets more time to build stronger defenses. Some German generals warned Hitler that waiting was a terrible mistake. But the order never changed. Operation Citadel would begin. Before sunrise. On July 5, 1943. The greatest tank battle in history was about to begin. Part 2, Operation Citadel begins. 3:20 a.m., July 5, 1943. The silence across the Kursk salient did not last. Long before the German offensive could begin, Soviet artillery suddenly opened fire. Thousands of shells crashed into German assembly areas, command posts, and supply routes. Soviet intelligence had correctly predicted the approximate time of the attack. Their goal was simple: disrupt the offensive before it even started. Although the bombardment caused confusion and delays, it failed to stop Operation Citadel. As dawn broke over the endless Russian plains, the German army launched one of the largest offensives of World War II. More than 780,000 German soldiers, supported by nearly 2,700 tanks and assault guns, over 2,000 aircraft, and thousands of artillery pieces began advancing toward Kursk. The attack came from two directions. In the north, General Walter Model's 9th Army pushed south from Orel. In the south, Colonel General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army advanced north from Belgorod. Their objective was straightforward: break through the Soviet defenses. Meet near the city of Kursk. Trap hundreds of thousands of Red Army soldiers inside a massive pocket. On paper, the plan appeared brilliant. In reality, the Germans were advancing into the strongest defensive system ever built. As German tanks rolled forward, the first obstacle appeared: minefields. The Soviets had buried hundreds of thousands of anti-tank and anti-personnel mines across the battlefield. Engineers moved ahead under constant artillery fire, trying to clear narrow paths. Every minute lost gave Soviet defenders more time to prepare. Soon, explosions echoed across the front. Panther tanks struck hidden mines. Tracks were torn apart. Vehicles caught fire before they had even reached the first defensive line. Despite the losses, the attack continued. German infantry followed closely behind armored vehicles, fighting through trenches, bunkers, and fortified villages. Every hill became a battlefield. Every forest concealed machine gun nests. Every kilometer demanded heavy sacrifices. In the skies above Kursk, another battle was unfolding. Hundreds of fighters and bombers from both sides clashed in fierce air combat. German dive bombers attacked Soviet artillery positions. Soviet aircraft struck advancing armored columns and supply convoys. Neither side could claim complete control of the air. On the northern sector, General Model's advance slowed almost immediately. Soviet defenses were deeper than expected. Massive artillery barrages shattered German formations before they could build momentum. Every breakthrough was met by another defensive line waiting behind it. The Ninth Army gained ground, but only a few kilometers. In the south, however, the situation was different. Hoth's 4th Panzer Army made better progress. Elite Waffen-SS panzer divisions pushed through several Soviet positions after brutal fighting. Tiger tanks destroyed enemy armor at long range, while assault guns blasted bunkers blocking the advance. Yet victory remained far away. The deeper the Germans advanced, the stronger Soviet resistance became. Fresh reserve units constantly reinforced threatened sectors. Soviet artillery never stopped firing. Every road became a killing zone. Every village changed hands more than once. German commanders quickly realized they had underestimated the scale of Soviet preparations. This was no ordinary defensive line. It was a fortress stretching for hundreds of kilometers. By the end of the first day, German forces had captured several important positions. But they had failed to achieve the rapid breakthrough Hitler had expected. Casualties were already mounting. Tanks lay burning across wheat fields. Broken artillery pieces littered the roads. Smoke rose above villages reduced to ruins. Yet neither side showed any sign of stopping. For the soldiers fighting below, the battle had only just begun. The greatest armored confrontation in history was moving toward its decisive moment. Ahead lay a place that would become legendary: Prokhorovka. There, thousands of tanks would soon collide in one of the most famous battles of World War II. But first, both armies would have to survive the relentless struggle that continued with every passing hour. Part 3. The Fight for Every Kilometer. July 6 to 11, 1943. The battle intensified with every passing hour. Across the Kursk salient, smoke covered the horizon, and the constant thunder of artillery never seemed to stop. German commanders had expected a fast breakthrough. Instead, they found themselves locked in a brutal war of attrition. Every kilometer of Soviet territory had to be paid for in blood. In the north, General Walter Model's Ninth Army continued its assault against heavily fortified Soviet positions. Again and again, German infantry attacked trenches protected by barbed wire, minefields, and overlapping machine gun fire. Engineers crawled forward under enemy fire to clear paths through explosive obstacles. Many never returned. Whenever German armor pushed through one defensive line, another waited just beyond it. Soviet doctrine had transformed the battlefield into a series of defensive belts designed to absorb the full force of the offensive. German progress slowed to a crawl. Some units advanced only a few hundred meters during an entire day of fighting. The northern attack gradually lost momentum. But farther south, the situation remained far more dangerous for the Red Army. General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army continued pressing north with increasing determination. Leading the advance were some of Germany's most experienced armored formations. Elite panzer divisions fought with discipline and precision, combining tanks, mechanized infantry, artillery, and close air support into coordinated attacks. Whenever Soviet defenders resisted, concentrated artillery softened their positions before armored spearheads moved forward. Entire villages became miniature fortresses. Buildings were destroyed room by room. Streets changed hands several times in a single day. Fields of wheat were flattened beneath hundreds of armored vehicles. Burning wrecks marked the path of every advance. Yet Soviet resistance never collapsed. Reserve formations constantly arrived from behind the front. As exhausted units withdrew, fresh divisions immediately occupied their positions. The German commanders began realizing they were fighting not one defensive line, but an entire defensive system designed in extraordinary depth. Soviet artillery became one of the battle's greatest weapons. Thousands of guns fired almost continuously. Whenever German formations concentrated for another attack, waves of shells crashed into their positions. Supply trucks exploded. Ammunition depots caught fire. Communication lines were repeatedly disrupted. Even experienced veterans described the bombardments as overwhelming. The Luftwaffe worked tirelessly to support the offensive. German fighter aircraft attempted to protect advancing ground forces while Stuka dive bombers attacked Soviet artillery and armored reserves. The Red Air Force answered with relentless determination. Fighters dueled high above the battlefield while attack aircraft struck German columns moving toward the front. Neither side could dominate the skies for long. Every mission was contested. By now, mechanical failures had become another serious problem. Many of Germany's newest Panther tanks suffered technical breakdowns before even reaching combat. Engines overheated. Transmission systems failed. Recovery crews worked day and night trying to repair damaged vehicles. Despite these setbacks, German armored units continued pushing toward the small railway town of Prokhorovka. Soviet commanders understood exactly what was happening. If the Germans captured Prokhorovka and broke through the final defensive positions, the road toward Kursk could be opened. Marshal Georgy Zhukov therefore ordered powerful reserve formations to move into position. Among them was the 5th Guards Tank Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Pavel Rotmistrov. Thousands of fresh tank crews prepared for what many believed would become the decisive battle. The crews worked through the night. Ammunition was loaded. Fuel tanks were filled. Engines were carefully checked one final time. Orders spread quietly from vehicle to vehicle. Many soldiers understood that they might not survive the coming battle. Nevertheless, morale remained remarkably strong. They believed they were defending their homeland. On the German side, confidence still existed. Although casualties were rising, commanders believed one final powerful assault could finally break Soviet resistance. Reports reaching headquarters suggested that victory remained within reach. Hitler himself continued demanding success. But time was no longer on Germany's side. Every day the offensive continued. Soviet reinforcements became stronger while German strength slowly declined. Tanks destroyed in battle could not always be replaced. Experienced crews were becoming increasingly difficult to find. Fuel and ammunition had to travel long distances under constant Soviet attack. The offensive that was meant to end quickly had become a grinding struggle of endurance. As July 11th drew to a close, both armies gathered their remaining strength. Thousands of armored vehicles now stood only a few kilometers apart near Prokhorovka. Before sunrise, they would charge directly into one another. What happened next would become one of the most famous and fiercely debated armored battles in military history. The Battle of Prokhorovka was about to begin. Part 4. The Clash at Prokhorovka. July 12, 1943. Before the first light of dawn reached the fields near Prokhorovka, both armies prepared for what would become one of the most famous engagements of the Battle of Kursk. The air was heavy with smoke. Artillery echoed across the horizon. Tank engines roared through the darkness as thousands of soldiers waited for the order to attack. On one side stood Germany's elite 2 SS Panzer Corps. On the other waited the Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army, reinforced by infantry, artillery, and anti-tank units. Soviet commanders understood the danger. If the German advance continued, The defensive line could be broken. There would be no retreat. At first light, the order was given. Attack. Hundreds of Soviet tanks surged forward across the open fields. Waves of T-34s advanced at full speed, followed by lighter tanks and supporting infantry. Their objective was clear: close the distance as quickly as possible. German Tiger tanks had powerful long-range guns and thicker armor. At close range, however, those advantages became less decisive. Soviet commanders hoped that aggressive maneuvering would prevent the Germans from fully using their superior firepower. Within minutes, the battlefield descended into chaos. Dust and smoke reduced visibility. Explosions shook the ground. Tank crews fought at distances so short that some vehicles appeared almost side by side before opening fire. Artillery shells burst among advancing formations. Anti-tank guns fired from concealed positions. Infantry moved through burning wrecks in search of cover. Communication became increasingly difficult. Radio messages were interrupted by constant noise and confusion. Individual commanders often had to make critical decisions without knowing what was happening beyond the next ridge. German crews relied on careful target selection and disciplined gunnery. Soviet crews relied on speed, determination, and overwhelming pressure. Neither side was willing to give ground. Throughout the day, fierce fighting spread across farms, railway embankments, and open fields around Prokhorovka. The landscape quickly became covered with damaged vehicles, shell craters, and drifting smoke. Air support added another layer of violence. German aircraft attacked Soviet concentrations whenever weather and battlefield conditions allowed. Soviet fighters and ground attack aircraft responded with repeated strikes against German armored units and supply routes. The battle was no longer a single engagement. It had become dozens of simultaneous fights unfolding across a broad front. By midday, casualties on both sides were severe. Many experienced crews had been lost. Recovery teams struggled to reach damaged vehicles under constant fire. Ammunition stocks fell rapidly. Yet neither army broke. As the hours passed, German commanders realized that although their formations had held their ground in many sectors and inflicted heavy losses, the offensive itself was losing momentum. Soviet resistance remained unbroken. Fresh reserves continued arriving. Every kilometer gained demanded another costly assault. At the same time, events far from Prokhorovka were beginning to influence the campaign. On July 10th, Allied forces had landed in Sicily, opening a new front against Germany in the Mediterranean. Hitler now faced growing pressure to shift military resources elsewhere. Combined with the slow progress at Kursk and mounting losses, the situation became increasingly difficult. On July 13th, Hitler summoned his senior commanders. After reviewing the strategic situation, he ordered Operation Citadel to be halted. The offensive that had been expected to restore Germany's initiative had come to an end. Although fighting around Kursk continued, the Germans would no longer attempt the decisive breakthrough they had planned. The initiative on the Eastern Front was slipping away. The Red Army was preparing to strike back. What began as Germany's great offensive would soon become a relentless Soviet advance that pushed westward across occupied territory. The Battle of Kursk had reached its turning point, but the campaign was far from over. Part 5. The Soviet Counteroffensive. July 1943. Operation Citadel had come to an end. The German offensive that was meant to change the course of the war had failed to achieve its objective. But for the Red Army, the battle was only entering a new phase. Now, it was time to attack. Soviet commanders had carefully preserved powerful reserve armies throughout the German offensive. While German units had spent days fighting through deep defensive belts, fresh Soviet formations were preparing for large-scale counteroffensives across the entire front. The initiative had begun to shift. On July 12th, even as fierce fighting continued near Prokhorovka, Soviet forces launched Operation Kutuzov against the German-held Oral salient to the north. Massive artillery barrages signaled the beginning of another enormous offensive. Thousands of guns fired simultaneously. Infantry advanced behind rolling barrages. Tank formations pushed forward through breaches in the German defenses. German commanders, already exhausted by Operation Citadel, suddenly found themselves fighting on the defensive. Instead of advancing toward Kursk, they were now struggling simply to hold their own positions. Every available reserve was committed to slowing the Soviet advance. Yet the pressure continued to grow. Soviet industry had achieved something extraordinary. Factories far beyond the Ural Mountains were producing tanks, aircraft, artillery, and ammunition at an enormous pace. New equipment arrived continuously. Replacement crews filled the ranks. Losses, though severe, could increasingly be absorbed. Germany faced a very different reality. Every destroyed tank represented valuable industrial capacity that was becoming harder to replace. Experienced crews lost during the fighting could not be easily trained again. Fuel shortages, mechanical failures, and constant pressure across multiple fronts stretched German resources to their limit. Then came another blow. On August 3rd, the Red Army launched Operation Citadel, aimed at liberating Belgorod and Kharkiv. Once again, hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers attacked with overwhelming artillery support and large armored formations. German units fought stubbornly, conducting disciplined defensive actions and local counterattacks. In many places, they delayed Soviet advances for days. But they could no longer regain the strategic initiative. City after city changed hands. Villages devastated by weeks of fighting were left behind as the front moved steadily westward. On August 5th, Soviet troops liberated Belgorod. Later that month, after heavy fighting, Kharkiv also fell back under Soviet control. These victories marked the end of the Kursk campaign. For the first time since the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, the Red Army maintained the strategic initiative without losing it again. From this point onward, Germany would spend the remainder of the war reacting to Soviet offensives rather than launching decisive ones of its own. The Battle of Kursk came at an enormous cost. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. Thousands of armored vehicles were destroyed, damaged, or abandoned. Countless aircraft were lost. Entire divisions had been worn down by weeks of relentless combat. Historians continue to debate the exact numbers, but there is broad agreement on one point. Kursk was among the largest and most consequential military campaigns of the Second World War. It demonstrated the growing strength of Soviet planning, industrial production, logistics, and operational coordination. It also revealed that Germany could no longer achieve decisive victories on the Eastern Front through large-scale offensives alone. After Kursk, the balance of the war had fundamentally changed. The road to Berlin would still be long and costly. Millions more would fight. Millions more would suffer. But the momentum had shifted. The Red Army would continue advancing westward through Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and eventually into Germany itself. Less than 2 years later, Soviet soldiers would raise their flag over the ruins of the Reichstag in Berlin. The victory at Kursk had not ended the war, but it had helped determine how the war would end. What began as Germany's last great offensive in the East became one of the defining turning points of World War II. The Battle of Kursk remains a lasting reminder that wars are shaped not only by weapons and numbers, but by preparation, endurance, leadership, and the determination of those who fight. Part 6. Legacy of the Greatest Tank Battle. The guns eventually fell silent. The smoke drifted away. Across the fields of Kursk, thousands of destroyed vehicles remained where they had fought. Burnout tanks, shattered artillery pieces, abandoned equipment, and countless graves became permanent reminders of one of the largest battles in human history. The Battle of Kursk lasted only a few weeks. Yet its consequences shaped the remainder of the Second World War. For Germany, the defeat marked the end of large-scale strategic offensives on the Eastern Front. Never again would the Wehrmacht possess the strength to launch an operation on the scale of Operation Citadel. From that moment onward, German forces were increasingly forced onto the defensive. Every month brought new Soviet offensives. Every retreat shortened the distance to Germany itself. For the Soviet Union, Kursk represented far more than a military victory. It proved that the Red Army had evolved into a force capable of planning, defending, and conducting massive offensive operations against one of the world's most experienced armies. Soviet industry continued producing thousands of tanks, aircraft, artillery pieces, and trucks. Combined with growing operational experience, these advantages steadily increased the Red Army's strength. The soldiers who fought at Kursk came from every corner of Europe and Asia. Many were barely out of their teenage years. Others had already survived years of brutal combat. They fought through burning fields, shattered villages, relentless artillery fire, and constant uncertainty. Many never returned home. Today, historians continue to study the battle. They analyze command decisions, logistics, armored tactics, intelligence, engineering, and industrial production. While some details remain debated, particularly the scale and outcome of the fighting at Prokhorovka, there is broad agreement on one fact. The Battle of Kursk was one of the defining campaigns of the Second World War. It demonstrated that modern warfare is not decided by a single weapon or a single battle alone. Success depends on intelligence, preparation, logistics, leadership, industry, and above all, the determination of the people involved. More than 80 years later, the fields around Kursk have become places of remembrance. Museums preserve the machines that once dominated the battlefield. Memorials honor the soldiers who never came home. The wrecks have disappeared, but the lessons remain. History remembers Kursk not only because of the thousands of tanks that fought there, but because it marked the moment when the course of the war changed forever. It was a battle of machines, a battle of strategy, a battle of endurance, and ultimately, a battle that helped shape the future of the world. Thank you for watching Battle Chronicles. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey into history. Until next time, history lives on.